America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jamie Bowers, one of the producers on the show, sitting in for Alfredo Ortiz today.
And you can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. So, Jamie, thank you for sitting in today and being our Ed McMahon again.
That is right, sir.
You do a great impersonation of Ed. So today I am super interested in this discussion because I actually have some history to the auto industry. We're going to be joined by Henry Payne, and he's a 30-year newspaper veteran. He contributes to auto reviews, videos, and product reporting to the Detroit News. And he also hosts the weekly car radio program for 9:10 a.m. in Detroit. We'll dive into the UAW strike and how far that ripple effects go with him. But it's interesting. Of course, the UAW's been on strike now, strategically taking more plants offline and striking. And the President Biden, because both presidents went this week to visit them, but President Biden actually attempted to show some solidarity with the UAW strikers by joining their picket line. But his sign should have actually been a mirror, because it's his bad policies that are partly responsible for the strike itself. I mean, the UAW workers are really more casualties of Bidenflation. In the sense that they've lost so much of their wage, their hourly earnings, to inflation.
I think you're totally right there. I mean, it's also unprecedented for a president to take such a blatant side in an argument like this. Historically, presidents have been called in to mediate strikes, to kind of be a fair broker between the two. And it's very unusual to see a president say, I'm clearly on the side of the union, which is, I think, a dangerous precedent because these industries are so important to the economy as a whole. I don't know that you want to have the person who is ultimately one of the more responsible people for the economy to basically say, yeah, it's okay to shut it all down if you have a big enough gripe or you think it's a strategic time to do so. So that's another interesting aspect of it.
Yeah, I think so too. I've never seen a president do this. But also I've watched a lot of the interviews with some of the UAW workers, and as you know, but our listeners may not know, I worked in the auto industry early in my career. I worked for Chrysler and ultimately Daimler Chrysler. I always like to joke that I was there for the marriage, but I was also there for the divorce when they split from Daimler-Benz. But the policies that have caused this strike, or not caused the strike, but have caused these union workers to lose money. I've watched their interviews, and while they are, singing the tunes of more money and less hours and things like that, they also they very much understand how the mandates on EVs is going to impact their careers, their long-term job prospects in the auto industry.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, a lot of those mandates are coming from the Biden administration as well. And so it really, your comment about the mirror is well spoken, because both the inflationary aspects where they're losing real wages based on inflation, combined with some of their other concerns about technology and some of the EV arguments are very, very much driven by policy and not necessarily by technology. I mean, some people are equating this with the writer's strike, where writers are concerned about the use of AI replacing workers. This isn't really the same situation because AI is entering the marketplace outside of government interference. But some of the mandates for electric vehicles and EVs are coming directly from the administration and from politicians. So this isn't the marketplace saying necessarily that this is the direction. This is government mandating it. And so a lot of their gripes are stemming from the same guy who says he's standing with them. So that's another really interesting aspect to the fight.
Yeah, just kind of a risky move, I think, for the administration to obviously to pick it with them, because no president has ever done that before, and then to blatantly pick sides. But also, when these UAW workers have been very vocal in their concerns about the rush to EV, and they understand how it's going to impact their jobs. So I'll be curious to see what Henry Payne has to say from his perspective and covering the auto industry so closely. But now it's time for our interview with Henry. Henry is the Detroit News auto critic, a syndicated editorial cartoonist, and radio host. The self-described lifetime motorhead is an active race driver, Pulitzer Prize nominated cartoonist, and has published 3 books. Henry, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Elaine, good to be with you.
Excellent. So you are up in Detroit, which is one of my old cities that I spent some time in. I was with Chrysler, and early in my career, I worked in public relations. And so I saw a lot. I kind of lived through one of the strikes there. I kind of know what it is like on the inside. And I was there kind of right as they announced the merger to Daimler-Benz. So I affectionately like to refer to it as I was there for the marriage, but I was also there for the divorce. But from your perspective and an expert in the auto industry, I mean, what do you see happening in these states that are so reliant on the auto industry? This ripple effect in the economy.
Well, we love our cars up here in Detroit. I got a racing suit on. Good to be with you. I'm racing cars up here at M1 Concourse today. So the bubble up here in Detroit is all about cars, and it's all about unions. But when you look at the country as a whole, about half the auto workforce today is non-union. That is a huge change in the last 50 years, not only to this town, but to this country. And so the UAW goes through these bargaining exercises. Sometimes they end in strikes. But the fact is, half of the industry is still operating in this country. You have companies like Honda in Ohio, Toyota in Kentucky, new plants by Kia and Hyundai down south in Georgia, Tesla in Texas. These are all non-union plants. They are all major competitors to the Detroit Three. They're not stopping. They continue to produce. And so it's a lot of pressure on these auto companies to come to the table and do something with the UAW. But it is also an anchor around their ankles. This is a competitive disadvantage that they face with competitors in this country.
Well, do you think one of the things, even though half is non-union, I would assume that those contracts that get negotiated at the union shops are going to affect how those Toyota plants, the other manufacturers who are non-union, price things out, because now you're competing for workers at that point. So even though they're non-union, these negotiations will affect them in some ways, correct?
Yeah, it's a market. It's a labor market, and so they'll obviously affect them. But what you generally see is that the transplant automakers like Honda, Toyota, Kia pay about $45 an hour. You go to, about $55 an hour. The Detroit 3 UAW covered automakers are paying about $65 an hour. And then new startups like Tesla are paying $45 an hour. So it's a competitive job market. But again, the union tends to make the big three less competitive in the very small margins that you have in manufacturing. And it also makes them less flexible. And it's interesting. I went, if you go down south, just 3 hours from here, to Honda, or go a little further south to VW in Tennessee, the UAW has tried to unionize those shops, and they have failed. There's a lot of disadvantages to being in the union in terms of the politics that comes into being in that union, the dues that you have to pay for that union, and just the flexibility that you have within a company to move around. So it's a very diverse labor market in the industry.
Yeah. How many jobs do you think are affected by these strikes if all three go on strike? When you consider the supplier community that's then put out of business, or at least for a period, at these plants.
Yeah, there's a long tail. I think the numbers that are employed by the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, as we call them, is about 300,000 nationwide. So about 150,000 UAW workers are out there potentially affected by these strikes. They're not all out on strike. But then there's a long tail in this industry that makes all kinds of parts. And that's one of the real concerns that the union has in these negotiations, is the government is forcing this industry to go electric. And the electric drivetrain, electric motors, batteries take a lot less labor to put together than gas engines, transmissions, engine blocks, valve trains, all of that. So that's a big part of this about this strike, is a worry that as the government forces the industry to go electric, a lot of those jobs are going to disappear, and a lot of them may go overseas.
You talked about the auto companies that are down south, and that they're non-unionized. Do you foresee at any point the big three moving more south and trying to get out of the union piece of it? They have such great legacy costs that some of those other auto manufacturers just don't have in terms of retirees.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bankruptcy in 2009 took care of a lot of those legacy costs, helped these manufacturers get out from under that overhead. And part of what this strike is about is the UAW trying to claw back some of those benefits that they lost during the bankruptcy. Obviously, the automakers don't want to give up those gains, things like tier wages, getting rid of cost of living adjustments. So that's a big part of the negotiation. But to your point, Elaine, if you look at where the Detroit 3, where Ford, Stellantis, and GM are building these battery plants in order to meet these government regulations, they're all in the South. They're all in right-to-work states, not only right-to-work states, but also states that have low energy costs, because batteries are enormously energy intense. And so they want to go down to places that have hydropower, like Tennessee, that have a diverse mix of nuclear, like in the Carolinas. So that's where a lot of these plants are being built, and they're not under existing UAW contract. So again, the UAW is very concerned about what employment's going to be like at these plants.
Yeah, I know Michigan just revoked the right to work. And what has been kind of the ripple effect of revoking the right to work?
I think that's one of the difficulties of this strike. There are a lot of politics in this strike. Sean Payne, who's the CEO of UAW, is very aware that this is a political season. He's leaning on the Biden administration. Joe Biden was out here this week in Detroit. Donald Trump was out here in Detroit. But if you look at the rhetoric from Sean Payne at that press conference with Joe Biden, in which he talked about the Detroit 3 automakers as being the equivalent of Nazi Germany. during World War II. I mean, very, very militant rhetoric, calling the companies they're dealing with the enemy. And then you couple that with this state giving up right to work, and you can see how companies are nervous about bringing this union into their shop. So I don't think the UAW is doing itself any favors by comparing the Detroit Three to the three Axis powers in World War II.
I heard the same thing and thought, wow, you're not. That is them, as my mom would say, them's fighting words. Those are not things you say to somebody you're trying to get a partnership with. One of the questions I had, and you would know a lot better, and I'd be interested in your perspective, is how does this strike look different than previous strikes, and why now? Why? I mean, obviously, some of this has to do when contracts are up, but they clearly think this is a good time to take a stand. What is their thinking as to the advantage of doing this right now?
Well, as I say, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is electric vehicles. You have this. It's an interesting time. The automakers are all intrigued by the technology, but it's very much a niche technology. Whereas the government, the EPA and CARB in California are the big regulatory dogs in this game. They want the industry to go all electric. So that's not only making the industry nervous about what kind of market is out there, but it's making the union very nervous because an electric drivetrain takes about 40% less labor to manufacture than a gas engine. So that's sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. But otherwise, this every 4 years you go through this exercise of pattern bargaining. And what is unusual this time, the UAW went on strike in 2019. They struck a single automaker, and then they took that negotiation and applied it to the other two automakers. This time they're striking all three. And so I think that shows not only the stakes the UAW sees here going forward with the electric challenge, but also just shows you how militant Sean Payne is as a leader, that he feels like the union needs to go back to pre-2009. He wants to claw back all those gains. He's asking for a 32-hour work week. He's asking for $40 an hour wage gains. I mean, he's asking for a lot.
How do you think this is going to affect consumers who are looking for cars? I mean, from a practical standpoint, there's a lot more people buying cars than there are people making cars. What do you think this is going to do to either costs or availability? And are there any winners in this?
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting is I don't think the consumer really feels the impact of this. They've felt the impact of the last few years, which were chaotic with the pandemic and with the supply chain disruptions. And so I think the consumer has gotten used to the idea of cars being harder to get on the lot. There's a lot less inventory in the supply chain. They've gotten used to higher prices. I think that they're not aware of is that as the industry goes electric, these high prices are going to continue. Electric vehicles are much costlier than gas cars. They tend to be $15,000 to $20,000 more expensive. So the average price of a vehicle in the last 5 years has gone from about $30,000 to almost $50,000. And if this electric trend takes hold, I expect that inflation will continue. But if you look at the consumer preference for what's on the lot these days, not much has changed. Consumers tend to prefer by about 90% gas engine cars, and as a result, electric vehicles are sitting on lots about twice as long, 100 days, than gas engine cars are.
What about the dealer network? How are dealers feeling about the strike, as well as obviously vehicles on the lot and what they're hearing from their consumers? Have you talked to some dealers?
Yeah, the dealers are okay for now. I mean, the manufacturers know what's coming during these negotiations. So they try to put a lot of inventory out there so there isn't a disruption at the dealer end. So I don't think the dealers are affected yet, at least among the Detroit Three. All the struck plants, whether they're assembly plants or whether they're UAW supplier plants, they've all been Detroit Three plants so far. So those companies, I think, are prepared for now. In terms of inventory, this isn't their first rodeo. They know what sort of inventory they need. I think the greater concern from dealers is this electrification push, because the manufacturers are pushing a lot of electric product on the dealer, and they're not selling. They're sitting on the lot for over 100 days. Dealers do not want inventory sitting on their lot for 100 days. So the manufacturers are getting a lot of feedback from dealers on that point, but the manufacturers are the ones who are going to get hit by massive fines by these governments, by Washington and by California in 2026 if they don't sell electric cars. So you can kind of see this train wreck coming.
Yeah.
Well, it really is a train wreck because it really impacts right down the line. I mean, first, Americans have been facing, historic inflation over the course of the last 2.5 years. We've seen prices on everything go up about 17, 18%. So we're facing all that. We've also, wages are being eaten up by inflation. So we're all, losing money as a result of the inflation. And now we're being asked to invest in cars that average, $50,000, $60,000 in electric vehicles. But they're, for people who have to travel great distances or there's the network. When you start thinking about outside of cities, the network of chargers doesn't exist. I mean, they're just really getting out over their skis ahead of time, and they're not ready to support what they're asking us to do.
Yeah, I mean, consumer markets are wonderful things. I mean, it is. I come from a small manufacturing family. It is really hard to produce a product and get it to gain traction in the market. I mean, consumer markets are very efficient things, and when you have governments come in and tell an industry what they have to build, it's very disruptive. But to the inflation point, a lot of what's driving inflation is gas costs, and that's the other side of this: is that these government bodies, in order to try to force electric adoption, are forcing up gas prices by taking potential oil production off the market. So these governments are not upset at $4 a gallon gas. They're not upset by $7 a gallon gas in California because they feel like that'll help drive consumers to these electric cars. But you go talk to the UAW folks on the line, and they don't like having to pay $4 a gallon gas to get to work every day. It was $2.50 a gallon 2 or 3 years ago. Now it's $4 a gallon, and that's one of the things that's driving these negotiations between the UAW and the Detroit Three. Is the UAW wants COLAs. They want cost of living increases back in their contracts because they're all seeing their wages getting eaten up by these inflation rates.
Sure. Where do you think this ends? I mean, if you had a crystal ball, how long does this last, and who comes out? Is it a compromise? Is there a UAW win? Do the manufacturers hold strong? What do you think?
Yeah, they always come to an agreement. 2019. Different political administration, the Trump administration, this is the Biden administration, regardless of political party, they always come to a solution. But the government in office right now, the Biden administration, is much friendlier to the UAW than Republican administrations are. And so I would expect the government to get more involved here because they've been passing out billions of dollars to the automakers in subsidies in order to help them build battery plants, in order to help them sell electric vehicles. I would think the UAW wants a piece of that. Sean Fain, for example, the president of the UAW, was very critical that the government gave Ford Motor Company $9 billion last month to build battery plants. So I think that's what's different in these negotiations is the UAW wants to prepare for this electric future, and they feel like they have an ally in the White House. So I would expect the union to be very militant on this strike, much more so than the last one in 2019.
It's interesting because we've never seen a president go and picket in a UAW strike or any strike that I'm aware of. And President Biden went to go picket, but it's a lot of his policies in some of the reckless spending that has driven up inflation and, caused the wage loss of these workers. So it's almost like he kind of needs to look in a mirror, really, because his policies caused their wage losses, and his policies on energy are forcing this whole EV push very quickly, which causes the UAW to worry. And I just wonder what the overall reaction from UAW workers were, if you were able to talk to any of them about President Biden picketing with them.
Yeah, I do think there's a real disconnect between UAW leadership and the rank and file on the politics of this. I come from West Virginia. In 2016, EPA regulations really impacted the United Mine Workers because the EPA was trying to put the coal business out of business, and the result was that workers in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Ohio voted en masse for the Republican president, for Donald Trump at that time. I think Trump senses a similar disconnect this cycle with the EPA mandates on the automakers, and so he was here this week on Wednesday holding a rally in front of auto workers one day after Joe Biden came here to rally auto workers. So I think Trump and Republicans see an opportunity here. Michigan, again, these manufacturing states, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, are heavy with auto workers. And if you talk to the rank and file, I mean, they're not real vocal about it because they want to support their union, but they're nervous about what the Biden administration is proposing. They see that most of the battery supply chain is located in China. It's not here. And so I think, they're nervous. And when workers are nervous, they look to alternatives. And Donald Trump, very interesting when you compare the speeches that Biden and Trump gave here this week. Biden never mentioned electric cars, never mentioned his electric mandates. That was the first thing out of Donald Trump's mouth. When he took the stage on Wednesday, is that you guys are under threat from these mandates. So it's going to be an interesting political season.
Very much, very much. Well, Henry, thank you so much for joining us and taking time from the racetrack to spend a little time talking to us about the strike and Michigan and the economy in general. For those of you watching and listening, if you want to subscribe to the show, you can go to salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from.